soon. We're working on it right now on the website, and that will tell people what is happening on the Thursday and Saturday sits in terms of what topics we'll be covering for that week. That way, if there's an area of special interest or particular interest, you can tune in if you want. If you want to learn more about that particular theme or topic for the week. So we're hoping to have that up within the next week. And also, starting probably in about 2 weeks, on that calendar, we'll also have some guest teachers coming. So in areas of specialized study, like Japanese tea ceremony, teme, which I do practice, but I don't have the depth of experience and training that certain friends of mine do, or maybe friends who have specifically lived for years at a time on a tea farm and are deeply familiar with some of the nuanced differences in terms of processing different types of tea. Or maybe somebody's a real specialist in fermentation, or somebody who really understands different aspects of Gongfu cha, who's maybe lived in Guangzhou and understands aspects, cultural or historical aspects of Gongfu preparation that they want to share deeper context. The point I'm making here is that we're going to have other guest teachers in, so you get to hear more voices and see other faces than my ugly mug, which is a nice option to get more diversity and more sharing and more classes available for people. The whole intention and aim of this is to create community, to share, and to deepen our practice of the way of tea, to deepen our exploration of the way of tea, and to cover different aspects of what I call the 6 pillars. So for me, the 6 pillars are a distillation of the way of tea into a digestible form, or into a structure that allows us to look at aspects of the way of tea in our own lives, in the extent to which we're really integrating those aspects. Drinking tea just as a daily activity is, of course, a wonderful activity, but it's not necessarily going to have a transformative gravitas and significance in our relationship to our lives. Whereas if we begin to walk the way of tea, a way by definition, because it's a way, denotes a path. And a path means that it's leading from one place to another. While the Zen aspect of tea would say it's leading from nowhere to nowhere. You could also say that especially for Westerners, and when I say Westerners, I mean European or North American, we are trained through our education system to think in a linear way. So circular thinking is not something we're as accustomed to. When we begin to practice the way of tea, that type of thinking that sort of transcends critical, logical thought begins to shift, and we start to see things in a more cyclical fashion. We recognize that beginnings and ends are one and the same. And this is a helpful way to navigate life, to be able to superimpose a map, a mental map, that sees life through a critical framework or a reductionist framework, which is the scientific view, but also to see it through a cyclical framework or through a nonlinear framework. This is where some of the shamanic practices like stopping time is an idea, which is a mental process. Seeing reality through a framework that is not just a Western reductionist materialist framework is very helpful. And so I say some of that because Eastern teachers would say to me as a Westerner sharing and teaching tea, which has a lot of Eastern ideas, that breaking it down into a list with, an ability to see the progress you're making in some ways betrays some of the fundamental teachings of tea, which is to put down or put aside the qualitative mind, or the mind that says, am I making progress? And I understand that, and I will teach more about what that means to put that mind down. And it's a very important part of side handle tea or bowl tea, which we're going to go into tonight. I'm going to walk through the steps of brewing bowl tea properly. But for most Westerners, having some framework, some structure, some context to what they're learning, I have found to be very helpful. So for probably the first 6 or 7 years that I was formally studying tea, I found myself consistently frustrated, which was a good thing, because I couldn't really understand what made it a way, what made it a path. When we talk about Chadao, or in Japanese, Chanoyu, the way of tea, I was having a hard time wrapping my head around, okay, so what do I do? What are the resources? What are the steps? And that wasn't really available. And as I consulted or I talked to different teachers, they wouldn't really give me straight answers because they recognized that I was trying to figure it out. And that wasn't a good place to start with tea. It's always better to start the way of tea through learning to connect with the spirit of tea, to connect with the nonverbal teachings in tea, and later on to add on, okay, processing methodology and maybe more refined brewing methods, and getting into the kind of science geekery of tea brewing. If you look on the internet, and you go into YouTube or you go to different chat forums or different areas, you find a lot of people just referring to the connoisseurship of tea, to flavors and aromas and vintages. And that's okay, there's a place for all that. But the reality is all of that only reaches us at the level really of the senses in the intellect. That's not a transformative practice of tea. And that's not the way of tea. It's just a small segment of the way of tea. And so I want to just emphasize that, because the way of tea can be a profoundly transformative path to walk. And it could fill up at 10 lifetimes or 20 lifetimes. But in order to access it from that level of depth, we have to go beyond it just being a study, just something that you can analyze with your mind or with your mouth or your nose or your eyes. It has to go beyond that. And for that reason, we have different brewing methodologies. So in our tradition, we technically have 9 different brewing methodologies. Don't be overwhelmed by that. They're usually variations of the core 4 methods. So leaves in a bowl is kind of where we all start. And usually the second step is to brew side handle tea. Now, that little preamble I gave, it was just to say, the one thing I want to say is that in these explorations, these weekly classes, we'll be going more into the way of tea as a linear study, more in that reductionist sense. And so the way that I've broken down and that I understand the way of tea, if I wanted to break it down into a list, so to speak, is into 6 pillars. And those pillars move from the innermost practice to the outermost expression. And so the way that that works is the innermost is meditation. Meditation is such a fun, daily meditation is such a fundamental aspect of the way of tea, to the degree that brewing tea is itself a moving meditation. Without actual seated meditation, or zazen in Zen Buddhism, it is difficult to turn tea itself into a moving meditation. So the first and fundamental principle really of the way of tea is a seated meditation practice. We generally draw most from the Zen Buddhist tradition and from Taoist practices, because those 2 traditions have thousands of years of history of treating tea as a medicinal, what's called a Shen tonic or a spirit tonic in Chinese medicine. And so for that reason, we draw our meditation practices from those traditions. But you might have a different meditation practice that comes out of the Vedic system or out of other systems. And in all likelihood, they will work fine with tea. I just personally have studied and explored more the Zen and Taoist practices. So meditation is first. And that's why in the Thursday morning sits, we focus on tea, silent tea, and then meditation. And sometimes I say some words about that. The second step after meditation is the cultivation of virtue. And in the last seasonal tea club, I went into some depth. I think it's up on our blog, but some depth about the difference between morality, ethics, and virtue. They're different paths of cultivation. I'm not going to go into that too much here, but the cultivation of virtue and purity and clarity of mind and action is really essential to a life of tea. One distillation of all the Buddhist teachings that I really like comes from the Dhammapada, which is an important Buddhist text. And it's a very simple 4-line stanza in there that says, abstain from unwholesome action, perform wholesome action, purify the mind. These are the teachings of the Buddhas. And I think that's a really beautiful distillation of kind of all teachings of all religions, of all philosophies that are helpful. So the cultivation of virtue, goodness. The next step out is vitality. So in vitality, we talk about the 6 healths. I have an extended version of that, which is the 12 healths. I'll talk about that more in the future. A lot of the previous seasonal tea clubs go really deep into seasonal foods, seasonal herbs, different types of movement, healing practices, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbalism, and what it means to live in alignment with the natural seasons and to shift our lifestyle so that the way that we're living is aligned with the seasons, because we are nature. We're not separate from nature. Just because we can eat mangoes in the middle of December, you know, in the mountains in Telluride, doesn't mean that that's a natural practice. Of course, eating a mango is not a bad thing, but generally speaking, we try to align our diets, our activities, our sleep patterns, even our meditation practices, the speed and intensity of, say, the Qigong or Tai Chi practice. All of those correspond to the season in the element of the season that we're trying to cultivate. So that piece is vitality. And vitality is where we begin, our inner life begins to meet the outer world. The 4th piece is tradition. I could go on about this for a long time. I already talked a little bit about 2 of the traditions. There's 4 traditions we really draw a lot from in these practices and teachings. The next step after tradition is methodology. Like I said, there are these 9 brewing methods. We'll be exploring all of them. Those brewing methods come out of those traditions. The second part of methodology, aside from the brewing methods, is methods of tea processing. So the way a green tea is processed is quite different from a red tea, which is different than a liuebao or a fermented shopur, for example. So going into understanding some of the differences in the ways that teas are processed, and then what that brings out in those teas and the way it influences our health and our body, our mind, and our energy. So that's methodology, and that's where tradition is meeting the outside world. And then the very last piece of the way of tea, as I'm explaining it in this kind of distillation, is community. I really love this Tolstoy quote, which is, happiness is only real when shared, or something to that effect. The sharing of tea is where the real joy of tea is. As all of you know who drink tea regularly, sharing tea with other people, tea is referred to as the great connector. It has an extraordinary capacity to work as both a social lubricant, but also as a way for people to enter into a deeper space where they can connect with other people on a really authentic, intimate, honest level. It's also a very healing herb in that sense, because when you sit and drink tea with people, it tends to bring us into kind of a primordial space where we can really connect with what's essential in the relationship. So many of my relationships with people have been clarified and healed by sitting and drinking tea with those people and just creating space with the intention of authenticity and honesty and heart-centered connection. So tea is a tremendous aid for that. The other thing I'll say about that is that human beings are fundamentally social creatures. If anybody hasn't experienced that in a very profound way in the past year, because so many of us have been in various levels of isolation, the extent to which we're social animals is deeply ingrained in us. And it's so fundamental to our health to connect with other people. What do we see such a prevalence of in the world is the use of alcohol. And the reason for that is because we're fundamentally social creatures, but we're also somewhat uncomfortable in social situations unless it's with very close friends. And the reason for that is because of our egos and our unresolved egoic tendencies. So we tend to use alcohol to lower the threshold of that egoic resistance where one personality meets another. But of course, alcohol can significantly diminish our capacity for awareness and lucidity. So we're not actually connecting on a much deeper level. And tea, of course, in my humble opinion, is a better solution than alcohol for deep connection because it brings greater consciousness, greater lucidity, and greater connectivity, but also helps to inhibit that part of the ego or that part of our identity that tends to eschew or avoid being seen in our total honesty, or being stripped of our trying to appear a certain way or be a certain way. Tea drops the mind out, good tea, living tea, and it really opens the heart. So it achieves this goal of facilitating really deep connection and building resilient community. So, I mean, look at tonight, all these people are here to sit and drink tea together, even though we're not physically together. There is a felt sense of connecting around this beautiful practice and doing something together. Of course, it's better if we could all sit and look at each other eye to eye and be in the same room. And hopefully we're going to reopen the tea house here May 4th. So those of you who live in Colorado or nearby, hopefully at some point you can come visit us here, because we put a lot of love and attention into the space. We spent about a year building it from the ground up. So, and we still haven't been able to really open. So I look forward to that in May, and I hope to see some of you in person. So that was a mouthful. I was intending on saying all of that after we drink some tea, but thank you for bearing with me through that. And what I want to do is hopefully all of you have a setup at home to drink some tea. And I want to drink 3 bowls together in silence and kind of let some of that mental stimulation settle. And then I'm going to go into the steps of brewing side handle tea and some of their significance, just walking through them one by one. And you're welcome to jot those down. Or I think afterwards you could email us, and I'm happy to email you those steps so that you can look into brewing properly. Again, this is just how we brew tea in this tradition that I study in. Different people have different ways that they like to prepare tea, and that's fine also. This is just the way that we like to do it, and we have our reasons for that. So that's what I want to say about that. Next week, I think I'm going to go more into some of the history of side handle tea and into some of the more philosophical aspects, less of the practicalities of brewing side handle tea. But for this week, we're more focused on like step-by-step brewing and just kind of like how we like to brew tea, practically speaking. So, okay. I hope you're not bored to death after all that talking. And I hope you have a kettle on and maybe a side handle pot, or if you have just a bowl, you could brew leaves in a bowl. The tea I'm brewing tonight is one of my absolute favorite show pours. It's an aged show pour, a loose leaf Maucha from the late 90s. It's called Eye of the Storm. And I really like this tea in the afternoon or evening because it first kind of moves to the surface of the body and it's sort of awakening, and then it settles down into the core. I find the energy really remarkable, and it's really dark and very full-bodied and rich and complex, and it's just a really wonderful tea. I might say a little bit more about it a little later. So Um, all right. So if you want to get set up wherever you are, we'll start with brewing 3 bowls in silence in just a moment. And my invitation is, with the 3 bowls, first we look to the body of the tea. And when I say body, I mean the body of the tea in your mouth, the actual structure of the tea. Looking to the structure, the viscosity, the what we call oleaginous qualities, how oily, thick it is. Does it splash to the upper palate? Does it coat the whole mouth? Does it leave a flavor and like aroma in the mouth in between steepings? Does it go down very easily? Do you find yourself wanting to continue drinking more steepings? These are qualities of a really good tea. And it's important to develop a palate for the qualities of good tea. On our blog, we have an article that says the 10 qualities of a fine tea. It's important to cultivate an appreciation for those qualities, because there's a lot of tea that's produced in the world that's all about aroma and flavor. Like a lot of the high altitude oolongs in Taiwan, for example, it's all about flavor and aroma, but it ends there. And so you have to be able to distinguish beyond flavor and aroma to the qualities of a really fine tea. So we talk about going to the body of the tea. It's really important. After many years of drinking tea or over time, I as much am interested in the body of the tea as I am in aroma and flavor. It's just as important, if not more important. Furthermore, you go to your own body. And so the invitation tonight is about going to, bring that back up, is about going to your own body. The 3 bowls in the morning, the practice of 3 bowls in silence, is largely about observing the way the tea is changing your body, the way that the qi is moving in the body, how it's affecting you. That's how we start to develop a practice of tea, where we're drinking tea to recenter ourselves. Every day I'm drinking a tea not based on what I want to taste. I'm drinking it based on bringing myself back to a centeredness. The secondary benefit of during the 3 bowls going to the body is that over time, it allows you to cultivate your attention such that you could call it second attention, or the witness state you hear. Some part of your awareness is always reserved to remember yourself. To remember yourself always and everywhere, in every interaction, in every circumstance. That way, you're cultivating a meditative state or a centered, grounded state through all of your waking moments, so that you're always working. There's a beautiful quote from Dogen, who is really the patriarch of Zen Buddhism and a very important teacher, a very profound teacher, where he says, continuous practice is the circle of the way. And I really love that quote. Continuous practice means whether you're washing the dishes, brewing a cup of tea, talking to a friend, that you are practicing. And part of the practice is some part of your attention is reserved for observing your inner life. You're meditating amidst whatever activity you're doing. Brewing the 3 bowls in silence while observing how it's changing your body is helping develop that reflex of the attention, some part of your attention to be available to observe the state of your mind, the state of your emotions, and the sensations in the body. So the invitation tonight with drinking 3 bowls together in silence is to just really observe how the tea is changing your inner state. A question I sometimes like to ask people, it's a kind of a Zen koan, is when you're drinking tea, at what point does it stop being tea and start being you? You know, where is that line? Is there some boundary? It's not intended as a question that you find an answer to. It's intended as a question that opens you to the inquiry. So maybe you could ask yourself that question while trying to just to engage with and see, how is the tea influencing my state of being? So we can take a moment as we start here, just in a second, and just take a snapshot of where's my mind at? What's my emotional state? Do I feel agitated and restless? Do I wish this guy would shut up so we can drink some tea? What state are you in? And take a snapshot. What are the sensations like in the body? Does it feel heavy? Is there a lot of earth element that feels like it's drawing you to the ground? Are you a bit tired? Is there a lot of fire energy such that you feel a bit scattered and excitable? Is there water energy? Are you kind of dreamy and a little bit in an emotionally fluid state where it's hard to focus? Just take a moment to kind of tune into the state that you're in, and observe the body as we drink a couple bowls together. And then afterwards, I'll go through some of the practical aspects. All right. I hope I'm not cutting any of you short from your 3 bowls, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the brewing. So following a general rule of thumb is helpful. For example, this is a very dark Gongting pu'er tea, show pu'er. So they're very small leaf tea, grade 1 leaves. It's aged quite a bit. As the tea ages, the cell membrane of the leaves becomes harder and thicker. And so it really requires very hot water. So I'm brewing with water. We're up in the mountains at 9,000 feet, so our water temperatures are all wacky. But it's just shy of a boil. In most places, it's between 205, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about as hot as you're ever going to brew a tea, unless you're doing boiled tea, which is a whole other method of brewing. So this is a very dark, it's an aged tea, it's a very dark tea, it's a shopur. So we're brewing it really quite hot. You don't ever want to let the water get to a full rolling boil. It changes the structure of the water because it breaks the surface tension, and it kind of turns the water from being smooth or oily or milky. Those are the words we kind of use to describe it, to being hard and kind of angular or pointed. So you don't want the water to reach a full rolling boil, ideally. So I'm going to just walk through the steps of brewing 3 bowls of tea. This extends to if you're brewing 5 or 6 or 10 bowls of tea. Of course, with like some green teas or oolongs or teas that are lesser oxidized, some of those teas, it's really like after the 3rd and 4th steeping is really, they really open up, and the essential oils and tannins and flavor and aroma fully expresses itself, and then they kind of start to fade off. How many times you can brew a tea is something that we call the patience of the tea. And I like the words that we use, like patience. It's a translation from the Mandarin, because it kind of personifies tea, which is wonderful. You know, I relate to every tea as like a personality. Each of them has a whole world to explore, just like every person does. And so the thing I want to bring up is that saying, okay, shopur tea, you brew it 210 degrees and you need to steep it for 10 seconds. And that is like trying to follow a paint by numbers approach, which initially might be somewhat helpful. But ultimately, you're never going to become a real painter, like Jade, my partner who painted this jaguar behind me, by following paint by numbers. You know, you have to break free of the prescription, right? So there are some shopurs, for example, I would bring the temperature down quite a bit. There's some shopurs that you could brew 30 steepings of that tea and it's still full bodied, well, not too full bodied, but it still has a lot of flavor and aroma and energy. Whereas other teas, you want to brew a much higher temperature for less steepings. The point to take away from this is simply that there are exceptions to every rule. And the only way to really know how to brew tea well is to get to know the tea. In the same way that if you meet a person and you really want to get to know the person, you can't read a biographical paragraph that describes, well, so-and-so went to this university and they have 2 parents and they blah, blah, blah. They have 4 kids or you know, 2 siblings and they like engineering. And that tells you about the person. That doesn't actually tell you who the person is. In order to get to know the person, you have to spend time with them, connect with them, and really understand subtle nuances of the way that that person is. It's the same thing with any tea. In order to really know how to brew a tea really well, and to know how that tea wants to be brewed, you have to actually get to know the tea. So I always say to people, if you find a tea that you really love, get a larger quantity of it and really explore it for a while. Or if there's one genre of tea that you really love oolongs, explore them. You know, explore oolongs from central Taiwan or from northern Taiwan, or heavier roast oolongs or lighter roast or different oxidation levels. Compare oolongs from Fujian in eastern China to oolongs from Nantou County, like Dongding oolong in Taiwan. Get to know that genre well. Try to have some kind of methodology around your learning process based on what you love, based on what you enjoy, because that way the process is so enjoyable and it can unfold in this natural way. A lot of people get excited about tea early on, and they go out and they buy a side handle pot and a cauldron and bowls and 20 different types of tea, and they go way above and beyond. And what happens then is they're not going deep. They're digging lots of little holes in a field instead of one really deep hole where they can go really deep and really develop some understanding. That's a bit like accumulating knowledge without ever allowing that knowledge to turn into understanding. And understanding is a much different level than knowledge. They're different levels of experience, and they serve different purposes. So I say that because I'm going to share with you some ideas, some rules, and the reasons why. If you want to explore those, you have to explore them for yourself to determine, is this true for me or not? If it doesn't work for you, then throw it out. But also know that there's a lot of tradition behind the things that we do. So we do things for a particular reason. So to get into some of the brewing methods, the first thing I want to go over is the seated position, which is akin to a meditation position. If you're brewing tea sitting on the floor, ideally both your shins are actually touching the mat where you're sitting, and maybe your butt's propped up on a pillow. This position allows you to keep your spine straight. You know, the reason that I like to sit on the floor, we say we like to be married to the earth, is because it helps cultivate humility, staying close to the earth. And also it's comfortable. Like a lot of people in the Western world were so accustomed to sitting in chairs that we're not used to sitting on the floor. And I think that's why as we get older, a lot of older people tend to become inflexible. They have osteoporosis, arthritis. They start to develop conditions that are a lack of movement. If you sit on the floor, like at my house, you know, we have a lot of floor seating, and people come in and they're like, what are these crazy hippies sitting on the floor? And I always say to them, you know, you can think what you want, I don't care. Getting up and down from the floor keeps you flexible, keeps you younger, keeps you more agile. And I find sitting on the floor with other people, it equalizes everybody. It's a place of humility. You're inviting people into to a more humble space, a more modest space. So you want the shins to touch the ground, the back is straight, the chin is tucked. This is another thing to look at. You can learn so much from tea just by observing all the different aspects of it. The next time you're talking to somebody face to face, try to observe, is your chin up a little bit, as if you're looking down on them a little bit? Or is your chin down a little bit, as if you're looking up at them? Or are you just looking eye to eye, peer to peer? Oftentimes, one way to know that you're resting in your ego with another human being is tune in. Do I feel a little bit superior or a little bit inferior to this person? And it might not be immediately obvious, but one way is look at your body language. So oftentimes when we feel a little bit arrogant, when we feel a little bit puffed up, or we feel superior to somebody, oftentimes the chin will rise a little bit. Sometimes when we're a little intimidated by a person, or we feel insignificant, inadequate, sometimes our chin will tuck down a little bit. You can notice this in animals, like if you have a dog or something, when they know they've done something wrong, you know, they'll come back to you and they'll tuck their head down, they'll tuck their ears. It's a feeling of I've done something wrong, or I feel guilty about something. So part of the cultivation here is to have a straight spine, to bring the shoulders back and open the chest and the heart. To be open and confident, but not to be proud, right? And to bring the chin down a little bit, which in meditation, we draw the back of the head up and we draw the chin down a bit. That straightens the spine, and it also rolls the tailbone forward, so that we have a very straight spine. This also allows the energy to run up and down the Sushumna, the central channel of the body. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the hands are the same way, what's called the Dhyana Mudra, which is the mudra of wisdom. The thumbs are just touching, and that can rest in your lap. And why that is significant, the thumbs should just touch barely, like a piece of paper could fall through. You come back to this neutral position throughout a tea ceremony because it is a recentering position. This is like holding a bowl. It even looks like a bowl, right? And it evokes the same feeling of scooping water out of a pond, out of a lake or a river or a stream, which is an activity that humans did for millions of years before the modern age. That feeling of scooping, right? Of getting low to the earth and scooping, right? It would be a very common thing for a long time, or to rinse yourself or to drink water. The bowl is like an extension of this, right? So when you hold the bowl in your hand, if you have a bowl with you, you can pick it up. The left hand is the platform, and it's sitting right at the level of the heart. And the bowl sits on top of it, flat. The thumb touches the lip of the bowl, and then these two fingers, like little pinchers, can touch this. Technically, the bowl could just sit with the three fingers. And then this hand comes kind of like a claw and then drops down. And then this hand can drop down a little. So it should be a comfortable position, but you should feel there's a slight tension. The tension is along this side of the arm as it's flat. This is like yin and yang, right? Yin is below, the yang is above. It's a yin and yang, or you could say heaven and earth, and the bowl is between. Or you could say in pulses, when we read the pulse in Chinese medicine, we read the blood. The blood is yin in the body, and the qi is yang, the energy. So you have the yang energy above and the yin energy, the earth below, and the bowl between. So that slight tension, you should feel it in the back. This sitting straight and holding the bowl at this position, one, it's connected to the heart and to your intention. The second thing is that the slight discomfort keeps you alert and awake, present, mindful throughout the tea session. And then you're bringing your intention, the heart's intention. What could be more inward moving than literally moving a bowl from the heart to the mouth and drinking? So if you're drinking 3 bowls in the morning, there are different practices, which I talked about last week. But this is a practice you can sit in the morning and set an intention for the day or for the week and impregnate the tea. Water is a fluid that is receptive to intentionality, what we call the yi in Mandarin. So you can sit and with your heart's intention, and you're literally drinking the intention and letting it infuse the blood. So that's a first step. A second principle that I just want to share about the brewing is that a lot of the brewing techniques come out of the martial traditions of Southern China in the martial arts. In the martial arts, let's say that I'm facing you. I don't want to cross over my center because it's rude to my guests over here to show my back to them. But also, because it comes out of the martial arts, it's also not safe. I've now exposed my weakness. So you want to stay open like this, and all the movements on this side of the table are done with the left hand. All the movements on this side of the table are done with the right hand. So you'll notice if I'm going to take a bowl, for example, let's say this table was a different shape, and I had to take a bowl from the right side and send it over here. I would actually bring it back around to the heart center, switch hands, and then distribute it. So just one principle to keep in mind is that things on the left are with the left hand and with the right hand. You're also trying to cultivate an awareness of your entire space. As somebody who's hosting tea ceremony, you're responsible for energetically holding the space for everybody who's there. You'll notice with people who aren't really grounded in their practice, when they have friends come to a tea ceremony or to a tea session, you're trying to have 3 bowls in silence, and halfway through the second bowl, these two start chit-chatting about Trump, and those guys are over here talking about the weather and the storm that's coming into town, and these guys are talking about how the tea tastes like dirt. It quickly starts to devolve into like chitter-chatter and discursive thinking and whatever. It's not that there's anything wrong with that, but it is that this is a cultivation practice. And if you can hold the space energetically for at least 3 bowls, then the level of connection that happens subsequent to that will be much deeper. There's also a lot that happens in this unspoken nonverbal space. when you sit in silence with people beyond the comfort zone, which is usually about 15 seconds in our culture, because we don't spend time in quietude. We're not comfortable with quietude in our culture. If you can sit in silence and you're giving people permission that this is actually okay, it's what we're doing, something happens, and that's a significant part of the shift. They're creating space internally for the tea to work its magic and to feel it, to feel their experience and to connect with the moment. It's like a lightning rod that there's a moment you can feel it in a tea ceremony when it lands. Everybody kind of lands. And the mind, all the discursive, distracted thinking settles if the tea is allowed to work its magic. That is the moment where we start to recognize our unity, our oneness with the people there, and our oneness with the moment itself. That's where the real juju is, the real magic in tea. And it's the responsibility of the brewer to hold that space. That's why maintaining an awareness of the body, because the body doesn't time travel. It's not in the future or the past. Connecting with your own body in the practice, or having an embodied practice, anchors the tea ceremony. Which is why you might notice as I'm brewing, in between each step, so I pour the tea in the bowls, the hands come back into the center. That is a moment to return to the center. And then the bowls go out, return to the center. Bowls come back in, return to the center. That embodies and anchors the practice in a really powerful way. And I encourage also doing that when you're brewing tea for yourself. The other thing I want to say about the way you hold the bowl, part of the reason we're not sipping out of mugs, right, is because the bowl facilitates using both hands. Not only is that like right, left brain, right, left side of the body, but also the encouragement is as you're sipping tea to not put it down and then like scroll Instagram or like, do whatever. The idea is have every action be complete. So the picking up of the bowl, staying with it throughout the whole thing, and then putting it down is a complete action unto itself. It's not broken up. It's not fragmented. This goes back again to that quote I said earlier, which is continuous practice is the circle of the way. We have to cultivate the mind that even wants to be in continuous practice, because there are bajillions of dollars going into marketing companies and ad agencies who are literally trying to steal your attention all day long. And they're very good at it. And so our attention span is like constant need for stimulation and to do other things and to be distracted. So to sit silently and to sit in stillness and to allow yourself to come down to that level of stillness out of which all of our wisdom comes, is becoming increasingly difficult, which is why having a practice of focus, a practice for cultivating concentration and attention and awareness is incredibly powerful and transformative potentially. So, okay, we're going to walk through the steps, and I won't dwell too much on each step. Again, next week, I'm going to go into some of the more philosophical or historical reasons for developments, but this is more about just going kind of step by step through brewing the tea. So I'm going to pretend like we're starting from scratch, and that way this will make more sense. Okay, so you're going to pretend like there's tea in the scoop. And that we just sat down for tea. Even when I'm drinking tea by myself, I take a moment to bow. That is really, that's honoring. It's honoring all the teachers in the past. It's also acknowledging or honoring the people who you would like to call to presence in your life. We all know somebody who is suffering right now or going through a difficult time in their lives. It is taking a moment to acknowledge them. It's also bowing to Buddha nature. If that doesn't work for you, then it could be to your higher self or to the best version of yourself. It's taking a moment to say, I am marking a space, a time, to bow down, to acknowledge that this is an important moment for me, that I wish to bring more presence into my life. It's also a gesture of humility and of respect. So you see in a lot of the martial traditions, this posture. What the posture means is, you see in the martial arts a lot, what the posture means is, I have strength. I'll knock you out, if I'm a martial artist. But it also means I have compassion, and I cover my strength with compassion. I shield it. It's like the bell and the vajra in Tibetan Buddhism. There's power here. There's juju, there's strength. But there's also deep compassion, heart-centered living, mindfulness, awareness of the impact and the karmas created by my actions, by my thoughts, by my words. So it's strength and compassion together, right? The bowing is saying respect for this experience, respect for these ancient trees. For those of you who have been to a tea forest in Asia, or who have watched the processing of tea, it's an incredibly labor-intensive process. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of sacrifice. It's very difficult. A lot of tea farmers have it's a difficult livelihood. And so it's also taking a moment to say, I reflect on the effort and sacrifice that went into this tea, to this incredible teaware, like potters who have spent years cultivating the craft, the teachers who have spent all the years cultivating the practices and then have had the generosity of spirit to pass them on to us. It's a bowing down to say, I have respect and reverence for the teaware, the teachings, the practice. The development and cultivation of respect is so fundamental to progress in learning anything. And so often in the West, we want to just take teachings and steal them. But as soon as we steal a teaching, we're cutting ourselves off from that teacher or that tradition or that practice. So it's really important to have respect. So that's part of that's part of the bowing. So the first step, bow, setting maybe an intention for the practice. I light incense. We burn aloes wood because it doesn't stick to teaware and it goes really well with tea. When I light the incense, the smoke in Taoist practices is the prayer or the intention going to heaven, they say. So you're lighting the incense, and with that, maybe setting an intention or offering a prayer. You of course, don't need to burn incense. It goes nicely with good tea. So the first step is the bowls out. So for each bowl, we're turning the bowl 3 times. And the turning of the bowl 3 times is traditionally, in these traditions, it's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which they say are the 3 jewels of Buddhism. The Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the truth, the teachings, the way, and the Sangha is the community. And in any one of you have to have all 3 of those for those teachings to exist. If that doesn't work for you, or you don't know anything about Buddhism and you're a hardcore scientist, it can be your protons, neutrons, and electrons. It doesn't really matter to me. It's the Trinity that we find in all things. Or Hindu Brahma Shiva, Christ, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, man, woman, child, whatever works for you. But these traditions come out of Buddhist and Taoist practices. So Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and Buddhism. And we say Jing, Qi, and Shen, which are 3 qualities in Taoism. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's the Trinity. So you turn the bowl 3 times and then put them out. You put out your guests' bowls first to acknowledge them first out of respect, and then your bowl comes out last. So you'll notice here, this bowl is going to my left side. So I'm turning it to the left. Whereas those bowls are going to my right side. So I'm turning them to the right. Why that's significant is this. Something you'll notice, especially when we get into Kung Fu brewing, all the movement, right, wax on, wax off, all the movements are always towards the center. That's energetically significant because you're bringing everything back to the center constantly. You can feel the end. So even if you want to do this, you're welcome to. You can feel that this is a centering energy. This is drawing the energy towards the center, okay? Whereas if you're pushing out, this is an outwards pushing energetically. And you'll notice this if you practice Tai Chi or Qigong, the way that these movements have energetic significance. So in T, all the movements are back to the center, back to the center. They're gathering from the outside and coming back to the center. So with the left hand, when you brew with the kettle, right? These turns. If you're doing something with the right hand, it's going this way, back to the center. However, when the bowls come out, it's the only time you notice I'm going this way, which if I go like that, it's out. What you are doing is you're extending energetically out to the person to acknowledge them. And you're also drawing out, you're reaching out to the other forces. You could say to the universe, to life. You're saying this ceremony extends out beyond us. And then throughout the ceremony, you're gathering the energy back in. So that's kind of the symbolism of that first piece. So the bowls come out first. And then the kettle you hold in the offhand, which for a lot of people, they go, it feels weird to use my left hand. And I say to them, well, tea will teach you ambidexterity, but also the reason you use the left hand is because later on when we do Kung Fu brewing, it's much more involved and complex. You want your dominant hand available for other activities. So you want to keep your kettle in the left hand. It becomes normal and familiar fairly quickly. So the first thing is you're pouring into the 3 bowls or however many bowls. And then secondarily into your pot. Now at this point, you don't have leaves in the pot. So we're assuming there are no leaves in the pot. And then pause, come back to center. Then the Zhen Shui comes out. Again, 3 turns. Same thing. You find a lot of 3s, in particular in Taoism. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the Zhen Shui comes out. This is a wastewater or rinse water bowl. Again, to your offhand. And then you pick up with the other hand. And the way you're rinsing, you make like a claw with this hand. So it's going to take the rim of the bowl in the bottom and the thumb is at the top. And if you hold it at just the right angle, around 45 degrees, and you turn the bowl, then the hot water will actually clean the lip of the bowl and heat it. So it's serving 2 purposes. 1, it's a sign of respect to clean the bowls for your guests. 2, it's preheating the teaware, which if you want to do an experiment, brew with 1 bowl that's preheated and 1 bowl that is not preheated, and you'll notice the tea is a lot better in the preheated bowl. But go and do the experiment yourself and you'll see that there's a difference. So you're turning the bowl 3 times. The amount, you can do 4 or 5, but 3 is traditionally the number. And then 1 firm shake. Of course, hold the bowl firmly so you don't drop it and break these beautiful bowls. And then it goes back to its space. So you're going to do that with all the teaware. So you've cleaned all the bowls. And it takes some practice to get it so that the water just actually comes all the way over the lip and heats the entire lip of the bowl and is evenly distributed throughout. And you'll know when you've kind of got it right. And then I take the left hand and I put my hand at my center at the table. And then you pick up your pot and you're pouring off the water that's preheated the bowl. And again, come back to center, pause. You'll notice you're breathing a little bit lighter because you've just done some things. Take a deep breath, come back to center. This is part of holding the space for the tea ceremony. And once you come back to center, take a moment. I like to raise the lid of my pot vertically. This to me is always a reminder to bring my spine back straight again, because we have a tendency to start to slouch a little bit. This is exaggerated, but to slouch, to start to let the chin jut out, to not be fully here. The raising of this vertically, for me, even the arm is opening, right? The arm, as the arm opens, it's bringing me back straight, and you can draw the energy up. As you draw the energy up, you're also drawing the energy down. So it's like a string pulling up and a root pulling down. Okay, so coming back into the body. I like to use these little tea stones. They're agates that we sustainably harvest. Or we don't sustainably harvest, we buy them from a sustainable source to put my top on. I like the way it sounds when you click it. And you're pouring in again in a circle, and now we're going from the outside in. So part of the reason for this is you don't want to pour it just on one leaf. You can actually burn the leaves. If you burn the leaf, it'll start to show up in the way that the tea tastes. If you pour in a really smooth fashion, you won't get as many bubbles. The bubbles lend themselves to more astringency. The tea's not as good when you brew with a lot of bubbles. This is especially important with Gung Fu brewing, which we're doing side handle. But so you want really good smooth pour, there won't be a lot of bubbles. And again, come back to center. Sorry, in all my talking, I forgot a step. No, I didn't forget a step, excuse me. So I would then just do a flash steeping. This is called awakening the leaves. You're bringing them back to life. So you're adding water and fire to the earth element to bring the tea leaves back to life, to awaken them. And you just let it steep for literally one breath. So it's really just a flash steeping to awaken the leaves so they start to release their essence, the tannins, the oils, and then you immediately pour it off. And back, come to center. At this point, you can take your Zhen Shui. Generally speaking, every movement we're going to do in tea, we're coming back to the center. So back to the center and down. Okay, I did skip a step because I'm not accustomed to talking this out loud, which was to put the leaves into the pot first, which is helpful if you're going to brew tea. So just prior to this last step, I will have taken my leaves, and again, we're holding between heaven and earth, or yin and yang, the tea leaves, and taking a moment to set an intention. So this might be for the well-being or the health of the people you're brewing tea for. It might be for your own personal intention. It might be just to, again, give respect and give gratitude for the leaves. It might be to imbue intentionality into the medicine, for whatever works for you. And then we turn the scoop so that it's facing outwards. That's a way of showing respect, again, to the guests. There are instances, if it's a tea that's really special, like the aroma, like certain oolongs, I might actually distribute the tea and let people observe the leaves and smell the leaves themselves and engage with them, because it's just a deeper way to connect with them. The only thing is the amount of times I've done that and somebody gets all excited and spills like some 30-year-old tea on the ground. I don't even, it's like, that's not ideal. So oftentimes I won't do that, but it's something that you can do. What you might do if you want to do that is have a small bowl with the leaves in it, and the bowl could be passed around, and then you're using your scoop for the actual distribution. And then you have the pick. The pick also comes in handy because sometimes a teapot might get clogged. So you can unclog a teapot, or you might have leaves that are just really sticking to the side of the inside of the pot. You can bring them down a bit. And then after that step, you would pour water over the leaves and then pour them into the Zhen Shui and then refill. And at that point, you could bring your wastewater bowl down. So sorry, I skipped that step. Okay, I'm gonna try to move through the last few minutes here kind of quickly because I realize that I've been dragging on for a bit. Okay, now when you're pouring, you want tension in the index finger on the top of the teapot. So you'll see some people in this tradition, they use the index finger and the thumb, which is again, like you see this mudra, it's connecting the finite with the infinite, or the mundane with the sacred, or the individual. In Vedic practices, it's connecting Atman with Brahman. So, or the self with the absolute. That these two fingers, you can hold one on the top of the lid and one on the spout. So it looks like this. Again, this is putting intentionality into the practice. Later on, we'll talk about Qigong and some of the energetics that are going on in terms of the practice as a cultivation practice. But for now, it's about setting intentionality. You want the index finger to be balanced between tight and loose, a bit like a string on a guitar that is tuned to the right note. If it's too tight or too loose, it won't sound right. That is the way you should think about your whole body. Too tight and the chi can't flow. You're not open. If it's too loose, you're just like hanging out, dude, just drinking some tea, man. So it's about finding the balance between being too tight and too loose. The index finger can be a reminder of that. You can kind of tune in. Am I like really rigid, or am I kind of fluid and not really paying any attention to what I'm doing? The ideal is to be right in the balanced space between those two, which is also the ideal state for meditation, and I would say for life in general. Not too tight, not too loose, right? I like my tea like I like my politics, but we'll save that for another conversation. Okay, so the pouring is, you don't want to come up too high because you cut off the chi in the shoulders, which is why you also need to sit high enough. If you're designing a tea table for your house, send me an email and I'll talk to you about it. You want the table to be at the right height so that you're not too low and having to reach up high, and you're not too high and like, towering over the table. So I like to, there's a rocking motion, it's very natural. It depends on the weight of the pot. If you're in a like non-COVID situation, you can have your tea bowls or cups touching each other. And when they're touching each other, then you can do figure eights. So you're tracing the outside of the pot in a figure eight manner, and that's heating the whole bowl. It's keeping the bowls warm throughout the tea session. A general rule of thumb that is true in all the different methods, you want to keep your tea ware warm, ideally above a certain temperature throughout the whole session. So you'll notice when we do a class on Gung Fu brewing, you're constantly showering the pot, showering the cups, and you're keeping all the tea ware very hot. It brews better tea. So then the bowl comes to the heart center. If you are handing the bowl to the left, then it's going to rest in the right hand. This is a moment, again, to connect with intentionality. It's to wish well or to put a positive intention into the tea. And then you distribute it to the person. The first steeping, you make eye contact with the person. And oftentimes I'll smile, which, try not to be too awkward about it. But I like to smile to the person because there's already a heaviness, a gravitas, and a solemnity. And people oftentimes are like, oh, why is this so serious? Why won't this guy smile? I'm a joker. So like, it's to be like, hey, it's okay. It's light. This is a light experience. Even the word enlightenment, is about being light. So it's not to be too tense, not too tight. So that first steeping, make eye contact and smile, acknowledge them, right? And it takes the edge off. It kind of says to the person, like, it's okay. We're just here to enjoy this wonderful tea together, this moment together. And if I'm brewing it for somebody on this side, again, from your heart, you are setting an intention and then distributing the bowl. You might, some people like to, when the bowl goes out, they turn it a bit so that it's not where your fingers just were that the person is receiving. So you spin it a little bit, so the part that you're opening to the person didn't just have your hands on it, right? So you might distribute it like this and then turn the bowl slightly. You don't have to, but you can. Sorry guys, the tea's a little cold, but sorry. We have some friends of ours here in the background drinking tea with us. So, and then again, pause, come back. When you pause, you're taking a moment to take stock of, where's my mind at? Where are my emotions at? Am I anchored in my body? Am I here? Or am I thinking about, what do these people think about this? Are these people worried about my tea? Are they looking at me? Are they getting out of the head? Come back, pause. This is not about you. Brewing tea for other people is not about the brewer. Brewing tea for other people is about giving them a gift and trying to invite them to connect with themselves. We don't use tea to promote ourselves. We use ourselves to promote tea in this beautiful practice. So then once you kind of return to yourself, taking the tea, and again, take a minute, take a breath, and then enjoy some sips. Again, if you're drinking tea by yourself, I would recommend not putting the tea down in between sips. Hold it throughout. The other thing is that if you're sitting with people who have never drank tea before, you might, after you distributed the bowls, give them a gesture of some sort to let them know they're welcome to drink. Or you might say, please, or enjoy, right? Something to let them know they can enjoy the tea. Okay. Can you talk about that? Yeah, sure. Okay, so your guests drink, and you might tell them before the tea ceremony starts, as you finish your bowl of tea, please put it down because they're going to come back to the center. This is called the breath of the tea ceremony. The breath is like things come together, they come together, they come apart, they come together, they come apart, such is the nature of all reality and life itself. You'll see in different tea ceremonies, it's a microcosm symbolically of life. The circles, right? The circles of life, the coming together, the going back out. It's a big exhalation and inhalation energetically. You're exhaling out and offering a gift, and then you're coming back into your own solitude, your own time alone with yourself. And then you're connecting back out. We're all together, and then we're alone, and then we're together, and we're alone. That is part of the magic of the energy of the ceremony. So you can also say to people before the ceremony, if you've had enough tea, if people never drink tea, if they don't like it for some reason, whatever, maybe you're brewing it really poorly and it's too bitter, who knows? But you can say to them, if you wouldn't like any more tea, then please just hold your hand over the bowl when I come around. And then you could take their bowl and give them water for the next steeping, or you can just leave the bowl with them. What I like to do is bring it in and brew water for them, because then it doesn't break the energetic of this movement of expansion and contraction. So then these bowls come back in. They would usually be empty, but at the moment they're not. And this goes on for as many steepings as is comfortable. I usually like to brew at least 7 steepings in a tea ceremony. because I find that there is a certain point, usually about half an hour in, especially if there's no talking, that everybody drops into another level. It's like a blanket comes over the experience and people drop into a deeper experience. There's something that happens there. It's also, if you're a meditator, it's a bit like a threshold you pass through in meditation when the discursive mind drops out. You can go into much deeper spaces after that. And the quality of the experience is quite a bit deeper. So I usually brew at least 6 or 7 steepings. But for your own practice in the morning, you might just have 3 steepings and then a meditation. If it's an informal sit where it's with people who really aren't comfortable with the silence, then try to do 3 steepings and then open it up with a question or open it up to dialogue. That is ultimately up to your own discretion. And if you're centered, then you will feel, okay, people are open to stay in silence for multiple more steepings and to allow that experience to go deeper. After you've done 3 steepings and the 3rd steeping comes in, or 7 steepings or 10 steepings, however many you're going to have, a nice gesture to mark that the ceremony is done so that you don't have to say, okay, this is our last steeping, is to brew a bowl of water. So in this case, you're pouring the water directly into the bowls, which is also purifying, or it's saying we rinse off this session. We return back to just water. We return back to just simplicity, humility, the beginning of what tea is, which is water, which that's a whole philosophical conversation, but it all begins with water, right? And then the water goes out. That people understand intuitively, okay, this is marking the end of the tea session, and then the bowls come back in, and then take a moment. You can bow again, or you can just say thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Do you have any questions? And that technically marks for them the end of the tea ceremony. However, I think it's very important to stay after the tea ceremony, to take a moment once the guests have left to mark the occasion. And that is, I think, a positive intention for each person. Maybe they've communicated something in the tea ceremony. And then you clean up everything. You clean up everything, you rinse the teaware, you put it away. The experience should be complete and whole unto itself. This comes a lot out of the Japanese tradition, which there's a term called ichigo-ichi, which means one chance, one encounter. And, or I think it was Shakespeare who said, you only have one chance, one opportunity. That might have been, no, that was Slim Shady, yeah. So the point is, this one chance, one encounter is to say, even if we all meet back here next week and everybody brews the same tea and I give the exact same talk and we brew it the same way, it's still going to be a completely different experience. And that's the nature of life. We're trying to cultivate a fresh mind, a beginner's mind. And so when the experience is done and you put it all away, what you're doing is saying, I honor that whole experience unto itself. It was complete. That actually begins, the tea ceremony begins when you set up the chashi. And when you set up the chashi, you do it with intentionality. I'm going to do another class soon on chashi and the philosophy. But what it means is you're considering who your guests are. Who's coming? What time of day is it? What time of year? What's the season like? What's the energy like? What's the circumstances? So for example, right now we're getting the biggest winter storm. It's snowing like crazy outside. It's the biggest winter storm we've had all winter. If I was doing a tea ceremony here for some local friends, I might put something out to acknowledge the snow. I mean, I'd have to think about what that would be, but the point is you put intentionality into it. That's a way of showing respect and honoring your guests and bringing awareness and intentionality to the tea ceremony. And then when you clean it all up, you can again in your mind acknowledge the intentionality of it. And then you put it all away. By doing all of that, you are honoring the occasion and you're also honoring yourself. It's a little bit like this. If you live alone, for example, you might think to yourself, why would I make my bed? Who gives a shit? Like, nobody's going to see my bedroom. Nobody knows. It's not about making your bed because somebody else might see it. And again, this is goes into the difference between virtue and morality, doing things because you're supposed to, or ethics because it's what you ought to do. The cultivation of virtue, in this case, making your bed, is because you're cultivating discipline, or you're cultivating self-respect, or you want to start your day cultivating a sense of accomplishment. It is to do something because you want to do it, because you're cultivating that virtue. It's making your bed for yourself. So when you set up a tea ceremony, you hold the space and you clean it all up and you honor the guests, you're also honoring yourself. When you clean the teaware, you're honoring yourself. And a lot of what you're cultivating is an acknowledgement. You're not separate from the other guests. The separation is an illusion. That's an idea. And by doing that practice over and over again, regularly, rinse, repeat, right, the next morning, then you're actually cultivating a state of mind, a state of perspective. You're shifting your perspective and your beliefs. And in that way, it can be an incredibly profound practice that can change your life. And people feel it, you know, people will feel your honesty and your integrity. They'll feel you're offering them a gift. And for a lot of folks to receive a genuine gift without asking for anything in return is really profound, because we all want to be seen, we all want to be acknowledged, and we all want to matter. It's essential to developing a sense of meaning in life. And there's really, I haven't found personally a more honorable and simple and direct gift than just offering somebody a bowl of tea brewed mindfully and with care and intentionality. I'm consistently over the last 15 years moved by how many people have come to me and said, you know, introducing tea into my life has meant so much to me. It's been such a positive influence in my life. It's been such a gift. It's been so helpful for me. And the reason we're starting to share this way is so that other people can start to engage with the practice on a deeper level and to start to offer this gift both to themselves and to others as well. So with that, I'm going to shut up. I do want to answer one question that somebody had, which is how many leaves do you use? This depends, absolutely depends on the type of tea you're brewing, how many people you're brewing for, and how strong you want the tea to be. If you're going to brew tea for 20 minutes or you're going to brew tea for 2 hours. Again, a very general rule of thumb, 3 to 5 grams. The amount I probably just brewed is about 8 grams because I'm brewing it quite strong. Certain oolongs, if I brewed 8 grams of most oolongs, it would have just been a very bitter tea or a green tea. So it really depends on the tea. You have to develop a relationship with the teas to know how they want to be brewed. In the same way that you have to get to know somebody personally and intimately to know how they want to be treated. We don't treat everybody the same. Well, maybe we do, who knows? Anyways, so I want to open it up now for questions. And I know that carried on for a little bit longer than we intended, but I just want to say thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope you gained something from this. And I hope that you learned something here. And we're also going to be posting these videos once we get it set up on the website with a title, so that if you want to go back and review any of it, then you're more than welcome to. And again, thank you so much for coming. So. Oh, similar to Vajra in origin? Okay. Somebody just asked a question about the teas Vajra and Origin, which are 90s, mid and late 90s Shangpurs. They're aged pu'er teas. I would recommend Petrichor, Soma are beautiful teas. Cinnabar is quite similar to Vajra. Forest Path is very similar to Vajra. I don't want to open that can of worms too much because then I'll just be going off on teas and that's whatever. But also you're welcome to send me an email and I'm happy to answer that question in detail in an email. And if anybody has a question, they don't need to put it in the chat. They can unmute themselves and just ask directly if they'd like to. Okay, it's pretty quiet out there in the Zoom sphere. So I think we will conclude this session. And I just want to say thanks so much for everyone who came. We appreciate all of you. And feel free to send us an email if you have any other questions. And if you want to come to any of the further sessions, of course, please do. And we support all, or we greatly appreciate all of your support with Living Tea. Again, this past year, we haven't been able to open the tea house. So like so many people as a business, small business, it's been quite a road. And so any support in terms of tea purchases or any kind of engagement or sharing tea with others, we so greatly appreciate it because it's helped us stay in business over the past year. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you all soon. And I hope you come visit us at the tea house when people can travel more freely. So thanks so much and have a wonderful Saturday night. Thank you.